Chris Martinson here with your coronavirus update. It is Tuesday, January 28th. It's 10:07 in the morning. First, the numbers. Let's look here. The total cases are now 4474, 107 deaths. Nearly all of those cases are in China, of course, but we have 18 other countries now that have reported cases. That's a really strong increase, and of course, no surprise because it looks like we're seeing an exponential increase in cases. No surprise there, especially with an R naught that we think now is somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5, and I'm getting that information from some real leading experts on these sorts of things. Here we're seeing the number of cases on the left scale and the number of deaths down below. You know what? Those kind of look exponential, and you know how we would check that out if that's true? Well, we'd put this data on a semi-log chart and take a peek. So this is your log chart, and we do indeed see the flat lines that we would expect to see if the cases are increasing exponentially. So that's actually happening, but let's quick go to some good news around all of this first. Here's something I just want to point out for you. I found this great update by user Ketchup over here on Reddit. Current status of outside of China patients. I do trust the data that comes from outside of China, so let's run through this real quickly. Thailand had 5 cases, reporting all of them cured. Singapore, all 5 of their cases initially now are reported as stable, which is good. France had 3 cases, all stable, moderate fever. Malaysia, 4 cases. Again, stable condition. Japan actually has a second case now we have to talk about, and I will in a second, but 1 cured and released. South Korea, 55-year-old suffering from pneumonia and on treatment. This bears watching because, again, this virus is a lot more devastating for people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So the older you are, the harder this one is to get past without serious complications or death. We don't have a lot of information regarding the other 3 infected yet, but it looks like it's in Korea. No surprise there. Nepal, the only infected is a 32-year-old, recovered and discharged. Again, not much of a surprise given the age. United States, we're seeing here not a lot of details from some places, but a woman in her 60s seems to be doing well after treatment. Case in Arizona, not hospitalized, recovering at home. Vietnam, father and son, recovering. Fever has abated. Australia, 3 people, a man in stable condition, a woman in her 50s, currently on treatment, maybe no surprise given the age, a 21-year-old woman, stable, fine, seems to be walking around. Canada, mild, self-isolation. Taiwan, all 5 in stable condition. Cambodia, now stable. Germany, good condition. Hong Kong, all stable. So the pattern I'm seeing there is that with appropriate treatment, this seems to be kind of like the flu. So that's really good news. What we're worried about, of course, is that with that exponential increase in cases, what happens when your medical system is overwhelmed? You get very different outcomes because I'm sure these people are all receiving the very best of care. But what happens if you have suddenly tens of thousands or more of these cases that you have to treat, and that overwhelms your medical system? All right, so moving on. Before we go there, I want to go to here and talk about this. This is the other case from Japan. So Japan and Germany both now confirm patients who caught the disease who did not visit China. And this one from Japan really actually concerns me a little bit. So we now have a new case, which is a Japanese tour bus driver in his 60s who had driven 2 groups of Chinese tourists who had come from Wuhan earlier this month. So we have a bus driver who's now caught this disease who had driven around Chinese tourists earlier this month. Well, it's the 28th of January. I don't know what earlier means, but this is not a good sign because presumably this person caught it. Who else caught it on that bus potentially? Who has this bus driver given it to? Since we don't know any of those answers to any of those questions at this point. But this now, I think, derelict for the WHO organization not to say, yeah, we actually have a real problem here, given the exponential increase and given all that. As we continue on, we'll notice that we've seen Tibet close their border. Kyrgyzstan has now closed their border. Mongolia did it yesterday. Hong Kong is taking more serious measures. We even see in places like down in Australia, the coronavirus here sparks petition from Sydney Chinese community urging the government to ban students. So this is a pretty, I think an ordinary response, and it makes a lot of sense. And I'm writing about all of this, but I just put out an article this morning talking about a secondary derivative impact. Of course, the concern for life, limb health of your family, of the people, of the population, that's paramount. But the derivative impact can be just as damaging for people and can be just as harmful, and that includes this idea that what are the economic impacts going to be? Everybody's starting to talk about this a little bit. Here's a nice Bloomberg article about that. Virus poses new threat to world economies, fragile stabilization, and that with all the Fed and central bank printing despite their best efforts. Here's why this concerns me a lot, because I can't figure this out yet. All I can do is show you some of the information. This is the Beijing West Railroad Station, which is just normally tens of thousands of people, thronged. Good luck trying to even walk a straight line without bumping into people. It's completely deserted. So how much economic activity is not happening because people aren't going to work, aren't going to their jobs? This is, people aren't avoiding the railroad station and getting across and around town by other means. They're just simply not going anywhere. We see that confirmed as well. Here's a video clip out of Shanghai. I mean, this is normally like all cities in the world, but in China in particular, this would be absolutely crammed. Trucks, cars, buses, all going places, all taking people to and from various economic activities. So we can't even predict what this means yet, but I can tell you that this is the equivalent of maybe putting a stick in the front spokes of a bicycle wheel. It's just an immediate cessation of activity. Meanwhile, of course, in the United States, in the overnight, we see the markets were crammed and they fell off a little bit and they got crammed up again. This is all the attempts by the plunge protect. Look, 20 points on the S&P. The world is safe, people. Make sure you go out and buy another Ram 250 truck or whatever the story, Ram 2500 or F250. Go out and buy stuff. I mean, this is just ridiculous that the only thing that the Federal Reserve and plunge protection team or whoever else is involved in this, what they need to do is just cram the markets higher. That's the response. But if all you have is a hammer, I guess everything looks like a nail. Meanwhile, what can the Fed not do by printing? Well, they can't really control what's going to happen to the larger global economy. So here we're looking at the London Metal Exchange and copper really down, because what can the Fed and the other central banks not do by printing? They can't make the planes take off and burn jet fuel. They can't make the factories run and consume copper. So we're already seeing some of the impacts out on the side of this, and we're tracking that very closely. We think that the markets have not yet fully appreciated what it really means to the global economy to see no cars and trucks on the roads of Shanghai or Beijing and other cities, and to see no people moving through the railroad systems there, railway systems and subway systems, and seeing no flights taking off from a number of major areas now. We think that's underappreciated. That's what we're talking about now at Peak Prosperity. We've got an article about that because it is time, we think, to begin looking at that. Tons of other data I've got to go through here, but we'll get to that next. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back soon.